My name is Erica Andrus, and I'm a member of the Flute New Music Consortium. I am here today with Paul Richards, who is the professor of professor of composition at the University of Florida in Gainesville. His work, Entanglements, won the flute and piano category for the consortium's 2017 competition. He has another popular FNMC piece called Tomorrow in Australia for solo flute. And hi, Paul. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so can we just start with maybe you telling us a little bit about yourself and your musical background?
I'm from a family of musicians. My grandfather was a jazz musician in New York, and he passed away before I was born, but kind of passed on that genetic heritage. My father's a cantor and a composer himself. He's got a pretty successful career in sacred music.
Oh.
And was also a pretty accomplished singer. And I've got brothers who are professional musicians, a cousin who's a professional musician. It's in the blood.
Very nice.
I started playing rock and jazz as a kid, but always had a love for classical music, so I was exposed to it. Did my schooling at the University of Arizona, and then my doctorate at the University of Texas. And been teaching at University of Florida since the last millennium.
Oh, very nice. Very cool. So you're not a flutist yourself then, right? Or at least flute's not your primary instrument then.
I've never played a flute.
Okay. Yeah, so I noticed that both of these works were dedicated to Kristen Stoner, who's the flute professor at the University of Florida. So can you tell us a little bit about your compositional process when you're writing new works for the flute? And how involved is the performer usually in this process?
That's a good question. So the first of these works, Tomorrow in Australia, which is solo flute, Kristen's a good friend of mine. We've been working together for a very long time, and she had asked for a new piece, a solo piece. And that work involved a lot of collaboration. Basically, I'd kind of come up with some ideas and knock on her office door and say, is this possible? I did some research, I did a lot of listening, but a lot of it was just kind of trying things out with her help, which is invaluable. The second work, the one that won the 2017 competition, she and Manabu Takasawa had a duo that she'd just formed, and I kind of casually said in the hallway one day at work, "Oh, I'll write you a piece." And, I just invited myself to be part of this thing. And that I wrote sort of without consultation because it didn't seem to require it. But as soon as the piece was finished, of course, I ran it by her, got some feedback, and I think made a few adjustments to make things a little more playable.
Very cool. So It's a very collaborative process.
It is. Like I said, especially with the first work. But what I like is knowing that I've got a performer kind of on tap so that if something comes up, I can reach out as needed.
Very cool. And she's right there with you at the University of Florida. So that's great. So we have these two very different pieces for flutes. We've got Entanglements for flute and piano and Tomorrow in Australia's for solo flute. So can you talk about the inspiration behind these two different works?
Sure. Tomorrow in Australia, which I wrote in 2008 or 9, and submitted it to FNMC many years later. That was a kind of departure for me from what I guess normally do. I was really interested in exploring different timbral possibilities with the flute. I normally come from, a lot of my music is sort of vocal, or at least I conceive of it vocally. And this was a departure to sort of think about timbre first, because of different possibilities directly related to the flute. And once I kind of come up with this sort of imagined sound world, I got this idea of creating this piece that was kind of like a ritual, more than a sort of standard performance. At least that's how I thought of the work. It's performed in a traditional way in a concert hall. There's nothing theatrical about it, but it had this kind of feeling to me of being a work that could be part of some like imagined culture and imagined ritual. In part, I guess, because of some of the effects, the space in the work, and that kind of thing. Entanglements is a much more sort of traditional work. When I told Kristen I wanted to write something for flute and piano, she gave me a kind of listening list. I listened to Prokofiev and Griffiths and other things. And one thing I wasn't hearing in works that I listened to, although I'm sure it's been done, was a kind of joining of the piano and flute sound. So the work begins with the flute and piano in unison, and much of the work is structured around ways that the instruments can get kind of enmeshed with each other. So in the same range, kind of right on top of each other. And I was just interested in having a wind instrument and a percussion instrument effectively try to blend and to play with that difference in a way that would try to get a kind of combined sound. So that's kind of where that came from, certainly where the title came from.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I noticed that you have extended techniques in both of them, and you said you were very interested in timbre, but they're used very different ways in each of the pieces. Do you have a method when you use extended techniques? Do you have a reason why you use some of these extended techniques, and do you use them in other pieces besides for flute?
Good question. I use extended techniques occasionally in other works, but it's not a kind of important part of my process typically. In the solo piece, it definitely was, because that's what I was kind of interested in exploring. For me, I think of timbre as a kind of way to help articulate form.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, we listen to, we can hear motives, we can hear themes, but I think the thing that we kind of recognize most quickly is timbre. If somebody's singing into the flute, that's a kind of attention getter, right? So in entanglements, I use some singing while playing as a kind of like marker in the work of places. It's kind of an articulation of what I think of as important moments. And what I'm hoping is that the audience kind of perks up at those places. And it's a little bit of like, I don't know, like highlighting an ingredient or something.
Wow, very interesting.
Yeah, that's, so in other works, I do tend to make flutes do unusual things more than other instruments in my ensemble works. I'm not sure what it is, maybe because I've had the chance to work with a talented flautist, and so I feel like I know the instrument in some ways, but I also really enjoy, like I said, just some of the color possibilities of the instrument.
Yeah, very cool. And so you just mentioned some other works for flute. So we know about these two main pieces, but what else have you written for flute?
Nothing else that features flute, though. A lot of chamber works where flute's
okay.
in some way. The bulk of my work has been large ensembles, so orchestras and wind ensembles where flute's obviously included. I just recently completed a Pierrot ensemble kind of work called Ouroboros, which features flute, clarinet, violoncello, and piano. And that was for the Bold City Contemporary Ensemble, which is near me in Jacksonville. And that involves a kind of similar approach to the instrument. And then, older chamber works as well.
All right, very neat. So what are your future plans for the flute? Are you going to write anything soon? And what's your current project? What are you working on?
There's the second part first.
Okay.
I'm just coming off of sabbatical, so I had this incredible, lucky chance to just be productive recently. So I've just finished my third opera and my second symphony. And the symphony for wind ensemble, it was a consortium commission. So I'm like just in the process of kind of cleaning those works up. Coming up short term, I'll be writing a piece for the University of Florida Orchestra. I'm very lucky to have colleagues that appear to like what I do. So, so that I'm writing a lot for local people. And a small work for saxophone and cello, again, for colleagues of mine. As far as, I don't have anything specifically planned for flute, but I'll happily write for the instrument again. I've been really happy with the mileage that these pieces have gotten, and I just enjoy the instrument. So certainly when Kristen comes knocking on my door and asks for something, I'll say yes, but I'm interested in exploring opportunities. I'd love to do a concerto at some point.
Oh, great. Well, that's something for us to look forward to. So thank you so much. This is very informative and very interesting. And I think that about wraps it up. Thank you so much for talking with me.
My pleasure, Erica. Thank you so much.